This is a question I get asked in almost every consultation once a family knows their child is sitting the HAST exam. How many words or how much should they actually be writing in the written expression section of the test? And I think the honest answer is that word count is the wrong thing to be optimizing for in the first place. But I understand why parents ask it. It is because it feels like something concrete you can actually measure when so much of the rest of the exam preparation feels quite vague and general. So before I get into that, I should probably explain what I'm actually talking about, because I know for a lot of families watching this might be the first time or they're very new to the process of looking into the HAST exam at all. HAST is created by ACER, and it's the exam students sit if they want to transfer into a selective high school between years 8 to 11 here in New South Wales, after missing the original year 7 entry, or if they did make it in, they wanted to get into a better high school from there. And it tests students in a few different areas, one of which is written expression or writing. That's the section this video is all about. Students are given a stimulus, which might be a picture, a quote, or sometimes both. And they have to produce a piece of writing in response within a set time. It's not dictation and it's not a comprehension exercise. It's generally a piece of creative, persuasive, or discursive writing they need to plan and produce from scratch under time pressure, which is exactly why a question like word count comes up so often. So I want to go through properly because I think there are really 3 areas that really matter here. None of them is a specific number of words. The first point is that this isn't about hitting a particular word count or exceeding a particular word count. It's all about quality. But I don't really want it to sound like I'm dismissing technical accuracy, because I'm not. A response that's riddled with spelling and grammar mistakes is going to be a lot worse in comparison to one that isn't, regardless of how long a response either of them are. HAST doesn't have a formal published marking guide the way the year selective exam does. That's run by Cambridge Assessment, and the criteria being publicly available. But I think it's reasonable to draw a parallel because the underlying skills being tested is similar, and it's also done in the same type of schools, albeit slightly different process, of course. In the Year 6 marking guide, there's 15 marks that sit under what's called Set A of the marking criteria, which is essentially whether a student understood the text type and analyzed the actual question directly with their response, with something where their response is very unique as opposed to being a very generic, ordinary one that's predictable. Then there's 10 marks under technical accuracy. This results into spelling, grammar, sentence structure, and more importantly, the marks lost here tend to come from getting simple or everyday words incorrect, from stumbling on something that's generally advanced in comparison. The HAST exam will be its own case. The exact weighting isn't published officially, but I'll be very surprised if the same basic premise or logic didn't apply as well. Obviously, we have our own internal guidelines and we have some benchmarks of what typically students are writing and whether they make it in. So we do have internally a standard that we're trying to get students to arrive for, but we don't even give them a certain mark when we're grading them. If everyone in the exam gets a 18 out of 25, that's the average. But you may not be happy with an 18 out of 25 if we're marking that for homework, which is why instead of you chasing a mark, try to be better and try to get a perfect response in regards to minimizing your answers and directly answering the question properly. What I think matters more than any of that is directly answering the question and ultimately what's being asked in the first place. If the prompt tells a student to write a narrative, they cannot write a persuasive piece instead dressed up as one and nobody notices. If it says persuasive, the same thing applies. Same with the discussion. And if the prompt says the choice is up to them, which does happen, then the right move isn't to default to whatever format that they've memorized and they feel comfortable with. It's actually to look at the stimulus, whether that's a picture, a quote, or a combination of both, and choose whichever format that generally fits it best. I've seen students that lose marks not because their writing was very weak, but because they wrote a technically good response to a question that wasn't actually the one being asked, or they didn't really integrate the stimulus very well either. The second point is about length, but I think it's more useful to think about it in terms of pages than in words, because that's closer to how a marker actually experiences the response. In the Year 6 exam, students were given 2 pages to write in 30 minutes, prior to it now being online. The HAST exam has always been on paper, and we have plans that's still being done on paper as well for the next few years. HAST gives students 4 pages or more, but only 25 minutes. So there's actually less time despite more paper being available. As a rough rule of thumb, I tell students to aim for a minimum of 2 pages of fairly normal handwriting, because anything meaningfully shorter than that usually struggles to show enough depth. Students in Year 7 can generally get away with sitting a bit under that, given they're younger and still building writing speed. That's obviously going to vary a bit depending on handwriting size. Some students can actually write larger or smaller. But 2 pages of normal handwriting is the benchmark that I actually use with students or just recommend in general. And on handwriting itself, it doesn't have to be super neat or cursive or anything fancy, but it just needs to be readable. A marker who has to work to decipher a word is a marker whose attention has just been pulled away from actually assessing the writing and knowing what the response is trying to convey. Strong students in Year 9 and 10, honestly, can be quite comfortable in writing 2.5 to 3 pages in this time frame. But again, everyone writes in different sizes. If you have 12 words in one line compared to someone else who has 5 words in one line, that's why it's a bit hard to compare. So that's why I just have it as a rule of thumb, not as something you have to abide by strictly. The third point, and I think this is one that actually gets overlooked, is that a finished response is generally better than an incomplete response. In written expression, I'll rather see 4 solid complete paragraphs than 5 paragraphs where the 5th one gets cut off mid-sentence because time ran out. And when students do run out of time, I see the same couple of tropes come up constantly as a rescue attempt. The character suddenly dies, or it turns out the whole thing was just a dream. Markers have seen both of those endings more times than I can count, and neither one saves an unfinished piece. If anything, it draws more attention to the fact that the ending wasn't actually planned. The fix for this isn't writing faster. It's planning properly before starting, so the structure is already mapped out and the student knows roughly where they need to be at each point to actually land the ending on time successfully as well. I sat this exam 3 times myself before I finally made it in. And if I'm to be extremely honest, one of the real differences between my early attempts and the ones that actually got me into Girraween for Year 11 entry from Penrith High School was exactly this. Learning to plan tightly enough that I could finish the response properly rather than writing as much as possible and memorizing certain quotes and lines to just whack in and hopefully landing somewhere in the middle. Memorizing something and doing that won't get you better marks than another student. You must be adaptable to whatever question is thrown your way. If you only integrate it and mention the stimulus just a sentence or 2, chances are other students will be performing much better than you. One more thing I'll add here that is quite practical is I recommend students actually time themselves during practice, properly with the timer running, to get a real sense of how much they can produce in 25 minutes and how good that response actually is once it's completed. And with our students, we generally don't want them to send in their first time response back to our English teachers for feedback. We'll have them redraft the second time a more considered attempt after reflecting on how the first one went, because the improvement between the very first draft compared to the second is usually quite dramatic. And the insight we can give on a properly considered second attempt is a lot more useful than what we can tell them from a rushed first attempt. That's obviously a longer game, and it does depend on a student actually being willing to put that reflection in or timing themselves. At the beginning, a student may never time themselves, but in the actual exam, they feel very nervous because there's time pressure. This is the way we simulate how they can improve in an exam scenario. When you're doing homework, just time yourself. The students who are serious about this would generally follow our guidance and our approach. The ones who aren't tend to submit whatever comes out first and skip the timing altogether. And maybe instead of even spending 25 minutes on it, they'll spend 15 minutes on it, submit it, and that's it. And you can usually tell the difference in the writing itself. We'll give you feedback regardless. We'll give you tips regardless, but it's the students that actually put in the effort. That's when we see a big difference compared to the students who don't. So if I had to boil all of this down, I wouldn't tell a parent or a student to chase a specific word count for the HAST exam for the written expression. portion of the test. I'll aim them to roughly do 2 pages as a minimum. That's legible, that's planned, that actually answer the question themselves with minimal mistakes in terms of spelling, grammar, and is executed pretty flawlessly. And I think that's a pretty good response to aim for, especially when you can finish with a proper conclusion. Everything else tends to follow from getting all those 3 areas correct. If you like this type of video, let me know down below. If you wanted a different topic that I wanted to cover, let me know too. I read every single comment. Please like and subscribe. And genuinely, if I see that you guys are enjoying the insights and the videos that I make, I produce and make these videos more often. Anyway, thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.